overview, share a few thoughts of mine about the presidential election, and then I hope what we can do is get into a lively question and answer session after. I do want to thank Rhonda and Marna for encouraging me to participate today and for taking care of the details for the luncheon, and to Dr. Howe for that nice introduction. Back in early September, Charlie Cook, who is a noted national, well-respected political analyst, wrote the following: "If President Obama is re-elected, it will be despite the economy and because of his campaign. If Mitt Romney wins, it will be because of the economy and despite his campaign." When I read that, I thought, that's just brilliant. It nicely summarizes and characterizes much of what's been happening during this presidential election cycle. Charlie Cook was writing particularly about the conventions, but I thought the insight applies more broadly, so I thought I would at least start organizing my comments today around that nice sentence. And let's start with Governor Romney. So if Governor Romney wins, it will be because of the economy. As we know, we're not in the best economic shape in this country. Better by some measures since 2008, not better by other measures. Looking historically at presidential elections, when an incumbent runs for re-election, typically what is important is the performance of the incumbent when in office. Other years, of course, what might matter more are the policy positions of candidates, the personal characteristics of the candidates, things of that sort. But performance always plays center stage when an incumbent is running for re-election, particularly performance on the economy. We usually talk about, in political science circles anyway, that peace and prosperity are important. If the nation's at peace and is economically prosperous, the incumbent usually wins re-election. We're not prosperous this year, of course, and the economy is center stage in many of our minds, and certainly in the campaign. Recent incumbents who have lost their re-election bids, including Jimmy Carter in 1980 and George H.W. Bush in 1992, the economic conditions and their performance in handling the economy took center stage there. So it seems that certainly the economy should be favoring the challenger, Governor Romney, this year. And he is well positioned to take advantage of the economic situation, given his background in business. And I think it's largely because of that, not only, but largely because of that he won the Republican nomination. So if he wins, it will likely be because of the economy. What about despite his campaign? There are a number of things that the Romney campaign has been doing quite well, but also a number of things that many regard his campaign has been going along rather poorly. Going back in time a little bit, it seems to me that Governor Romney didn't do enough over the summer. It can be a difficult transition once the nominee, particularly for the challenger, once the nomination is determined, looking forward to the fall with the general election. Sometimes that summer can be time well spent, but often for challengers who haven't run for president in the general election before, that summer doesn't get well used. I think that was the case with Governor Romney. The advertising the Romney campaign ran in the summer was quite minimal, in part because they were running out of money. They had lots of money for the general election, but they couldn't use it until the Republican convention ended. And they didn't have that much more money left over from the nomination campaign. The advertising they did run, though, wasn't used that effectively. Probably Governor Romney would have been better served by the advertising running positive biographical ads about him. If you paid any attention to the election this year, you know that Governor Romney is well regarded for his experience, his background in business, but on the personal front, his likability hasn't been that high. So he could have, I think, served himself well by running a lot of ads over the summer to address likability issues, particularly to increase the chance that Americans would trust him as a leader and also think that they support issues that they care about. The campaign opted not to run those sorts of ads, and I think at least in September, that decision was hurting Governor Romney directly among the voters. Another thing this campaign didn't do very well, they didn't handle the Republican convention all that well. Part of it wasn't their fault. There was a hurricane headed to Tampa, and they had to cut short the convention by one thing and shuffle around a few things. They had a number of quite high-quality planned testimonial speeches, as well as films that were meant to help humanize Governor Romney a bit and deal with these biographical issues and personal likability issues. Many of those got pushed off the primetime viewing hours and then in the scheduled reshuffling. So a lot of Americans didn't see them, and instead heard keynote speakers who sometimes weren't on message, sometimes were delivering multiple messages, so there wasn't one big theme that came out of the Republican convention. Governor Romney's speech was quite well regarded, quite highly regarded, but it did focus on trying to humanize him a bit, but probably didn't pivot enough towards focusing on some policy issues and drawing clear distinctions between him and President Obama. And then, of course, there was Clint Eastwood's speech to the chair, which in and of itself wasn't ideal, but it received so much media attention in the days after, and given that it was the same night as Governor Romney's speech, then any kind of positive reaction from the speech got a bit buried because of the attention to Clint Eastwood. After the convention, the Romney campaign was searching around a little too much for a message. They, of course, had their economic job message, but then were trying to find one or two other hooks that could be really negative towards President Obama. And it seemed like every few days they were throwing out a new issue and nothing really stuck. And so their messaging wasn't great then, and it diverted voters' attention away from what really is Romney's main strength, which is on economic matters. And then, of course, there were a couple high-profile gaffes by the candidate himself in September. His initial reaction to the deaths of the consulate officials and the ambassador in Benghazi, and then the leaking of the 47% video. Not only did they reflect negatively upon Governor Romney, but took a lot of news cycles, covered those matters, which pulled attention away from, again, his main economic message. The final thing that I think Governor Romney could have been doing more of, although this is admittedly a little challenging for him, he hasn't focused a whole lot until lately, really, on his record in Massachusetts. His record in Massachusetts could be quite appealing to moderate and independent voters, the voters that are going to be deciding his campaign. But for a couple of reasons, including the fact that to win the Republican nomination, he had to run away from his record in Massachusetts. The campaign has made the choice not to return to that record so much. And I think I really felt a bit hamstrung in their ability to tout the successes in Massachusetts. We have seen a little bit more of that of late, but I think returning to that scene earlier would have probably helped. Okay, so on to President Obama. If he wins, it will be despite the economy. Given the economic conditions, this race really shouldn't be very close at all. As I mentioned before, incumbents have a difficult time in re-election when the economic situation is poor. The economy is improving in some measures since 2008, and that does leave the narrative about the economy to be a little bit up to interpretation. Governor Romney wants to focus, of course, on are you better off today than you were 4 years ago. The Obama campaign responds to that by focusing on national economic conditions and how they have improved since the economic collapse started really with the collapse of Lehman Brothers just over 4 years ago. But that doesn't mean in a personal situation that people are feeling happy in their personal finances and personal pocketbook. So the economic indicators, again, are a little bit up for interpretation, and the campaigns are stressing the aspects of the economy that make each one of them look good. But really what I think is going on, more importantly, is the broader context. We are, as you know, a very politically polarized country. Because of that, there are strong Democratic voters and strong Republican voters, and there's not going to be that much party switching this year. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan was able to defeat Jimmy Carter, we heard a lot then about the Reagan Democrats. So Democrats who normally would have voted for Carter, but found Reagan's message quite appealing. You notice we don't hear about Romney Democrats. Democrats aren't switching sides, Republicans aren't switching sides. So that means economic conditions, which normally would make it very unlikely for an incumbent to win re-election, voters who are strongly Democratic are looking to other factors. They're voting more strongly for party line. They're not as tempted to switch over and vote for Governor Romney because they're so strongly tied to the Democratic Party. also means that President Obama is not having much success at convincing the public to vote for him. So the polarization means that the conditions that have helped us understand elections in the past aren't that applicable to the particular cycle. There are also some longer-term demographic trends that are favoring the Democratic Party, particularly increase among the electorate of Hispanic and African-American voters, just in sheer numbers of the population, as well as increase in voter turnout among these groups. These demographic trends have made some states that really weren't viable for the Democratic Party viable, states including North Carolina, Virginia, Colorado, and Nevada, that President Obama won in 2008. They're all in play right now for both parties, really. But in the past, those would have been states very difficult for in the recent past, for a Democratic candidate to win. This all really leads to another point, which is that the Electoral College math is favoring President Obama this year. The number of states that are solidly in the Democrats' corner leads up to a few more electoral votes than those that are solidly in the Republican corner. And then a number of these swing states, including the four I just mentioned. North Carolina is looking more and more likely to go to Governor Romney, but the other three are a bit less certain, with a couple leaning towards President Obama. So when you try to figure out how to get to the magic number of 270 electoral votes, President Obama has many more ways to get there than Governor Romney does, in part because of his successes from 2008, but more importantly from the changing demographic nature in some key states. Finally, in terms of despite the economy part of President Obama's chances, economic conditions matter, but an election is always a comparative contest. When an incumbent's running for re-election, usually voters first go to, am I going to vote for or against the incumbent? Voters will only vote against the incumbent, though, if they feel very comfortable with the challenger. And this is where Governor Romney has had some difficulties, as I already mentioned before. So voting against President Obama does mean voting for Governor Romney. And if people have questions on a personal or policy front of the challenger, then the incumbent will simply have a better chance of winning, despite the economic conditions. So if Obama wins, it'll be because of his campaign. A number of things that his campaign has been doing well. I just thought I'd highlight a few. Unlike Governor Romney, the Obama campaign actually advertised quite well in the summertime in the swing states. Their goal in the swing states for the summertime was to bring up Governor Romney's negatives, increase the personal negatives, and decrease his electability. So lots of ads. Maybe some of you live in swing states? Yes, which one?
Virginia.
Virginia, okay. We're not in a swing state here, so I can only tell you what I see on the internet when I look at ads that I think are airing out there in the swing states. But what I've read about and heard about and seen are some ads which are, again, focusing on Governor Romney as a person, talking about his experience in Bain Capital, using that to undermine his economic jobs message, portraying him as someone who's out of touch with the average American, particularly middle-class Americans. So there were lots of advertising in the swing states on those themes, and the message is a little bit different depending upon the state conditions. So Ohio and Michigan, for example, a fair bit of advertising on the bailout of the automobile industry, and tying Governor Romney's background to his, also to this op-ed from, 2008 to 2009, opposing that automobile bailout. The Democratic convention was most people perceived to be better than the Republican convention. The messages coming out pretty consistent, and particularly enthusiasm among the Democratic base was very high coming out of the convention, where on the Republican side, enthusiasm for the base was a bit different. President Obama has moved his main message, again, in the summertime, it was more focused on Romney as a person. This fall, it's been more focused on pointing out policy contrasts between President Obama and Governor Romney. And actually, this election of Paul Ryan as the VP candidate fed into the Obama's hands. They were planning to, journalistic accounts indicate that they had been planning to try to tie, as well as they could, Governor Romney to the Ryan budget. But then when Governor Romney picked Paul Ryan to be on his ticket, it became very easy. They didn't have to do very much work to tie him to the very unpopular Ryan budget, as part of their broader strategy to begin to focus on policy contrast and move a bit away from the personal issues regarding Governor Romney. The final thing that the Obama campaign has been doing very well, and they did in '08, and indications are they're doing as well this year too, is having a very effective and widespread field operation. They have offices, field offices all over the country in the swing states. A few weeks ago, they opened their 100th office in the state of Ohio alone. In early July, I happened to be in Colorado for a wedding in the mountains in a very sparsely populated county. And while we were there, an Obama office was opened in that sparsely populated county, and it was the 20th office opened in the state of Colorado. This was back in July. So following on their success in 2008 of using traditional grassroots field work combined with new media technologies, especially social media, the Obama campaign is following up on that this year. We won't know for sure the success of those efforts until Election Day, but there are a couple indicators that they are having some success. In many swing states, there were more Democrats, newly Democratic registrants this year than Republican registrants, so working on getting new registration was more successful on the Democratic side. Many early voting states, of course a number of states voting has already begun, and looking at the partisan affiliation of the voters who have voted, we of course don't know which candidate they selected, but looking at their partisan affiliation, in many early voting states, more Democratic affiliated voters have already voted than Republican affiliated voters. So again, one strength of the Obama campaign this year, same as 4 years ago, is work on mobilization and the field operation. Okay, so when Charlie Cook wrote that wonderful sentence, that was about a month ago, and the race, as we all know, has tightened quite a bit since then. Throughout much of September, President Obama started a little bit ahead, and then his lead was just increasing throughout the month, particularly in some key swing states. The race has tightened since. We all know one main reason why, and that is the debates. President Obama didn't perform very well, understatement of the year, didn't perform very well in the first debate. Governor Romney, on the other hand, had a very good debate. He's a strong debater, always has been a strong debater. We saw some increase in the polls for Governor Romney, increased support after the debate. And I think a couple of things that were important there, Governor Romney didn't appear to be the out-of-touch, uncaring, wealthy businessman that the ads and the campaign rallies of the Obama team had portrayed him to be. So he seemed to be, not only did he seem to be presidential with his knowledge and his confidence, but on a personal front, he did fit the caricature that the Obama administration and the Obama campaign had been presenting of him. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, voters need to be comfortable with the challenger to vote against the incumbent. Some will vote against the incumbent no matter what, but for most, again, it's a comparative contest, and they need to be comfortable with the challenger. And after the first debate, people started to feel a bit more comfortable with Governor Romney, at least finding that he might be unacceptable, even if they weren't 100% comfortable with him, seeing him in the White House, but seeing that he was an acceptable alternative. The second debate, Governor Romney again debated very well, but President Obama had a much better night. It's a little too early to tell from polling results what impact that's going to have. It usually takes a few days to see the full impact of that. And of course, they've got one more debate yet to come. So we'll see whether these other two debates will have the counteracting effect to the results from the first debate. There's many years when the debates don't really matter. They don't impact the trajectory of voting, but in a close election like this year, anything potentially could matter. And it does seem that the debates are having a consequential role, at least the first one did. What to look for in the final weeks. Speaking of debates, the third and final debate is next Monday. My first thought on that is that because it's on foreign policy and voters are more concerned about the economy, it probably has the potential to be the least impactful of the three debates, just given what is on voters' minds. Having said that, I think it's the greatest potential for Governor Romney to slip up in his debating. He is, like I mentioned, and like you all know if you watch the debates, a very strong debater, but when he's a little bit away from the areas that he's prepped well on, or a bit away from areas that he has a lot of detailed knowledge on, that's when he tends to, he might say things that come out not very well, like his $10,000 bet proposal he made to Governor Perry during the nomination process, or he loses a little bit of that confidence in the sure-footedness. And foreign policy is an area where he just doesn't have the background like he does in economic matters. I expect he'll be incredibly well prepped and on those topics he'll do well, but it could be on some certain topics he may be pushed a little bit off with his strong performance. We'll see about that. The other thing that I've been looking for in the final few weeks was the nature of the closing arguments that the candidates are making. There's usually, the last couple of weeks, the candidates really need to make their kind of final hard sell for us, and often candidates will alter a little bit what their main message is. I think Governor Romney still wants to focus on economic matters, but probably it would be in his best interest to bring forward a few more specifics on the policy front. As you know, he's been pretty heavily criticized for not having a lot of specific details for some of his broader proposals. President Obama, I think, needs to, recently, just really the past few days, he started to point out where the successes of his administration over the past 4 years. Probably should have been doing this a little sooner than he did, but he has turned to that topic. Economic successes and other successes. But really, I think what will be important for him in the next 2 weeks is more clearly lay out a plan for what he'll do over the next 4 years. A lot of the campaign, really on both sides, has been attacking the other side. And there's some evidence, especially among undecided voters, that they want to know more about, okay, you told me enough about why I should vote for Romney, but tell me how the next 4 years, tell me what it's going to be like, and tell me maybe how they'll be different going forward. So that would be, if I had any advice for the candidates, that would be the sort of the main piece of advice I'd give to President Obama, and for Governor Romney, a bit more specifics, fleshing out some specifics on his policy proposals. Okay, that's all I have prepared. I welcome any questions you may have. Yes.
Thank you for that objective analysis of what's going on.
Yes.
I have one question. What
Yes.
role do you think Ann Romney and Michelle Obama might play ongoing?
Yes, so the candidate spouses can be important, I think, especially for reaching out to certain constituencies. And both Michelle Obama and Ann Romney are trying to woo women voters. The gender gap is quite large this year, so women voters are strongly favoring President Obama over Governor Romney. The numbers that I've seen recently are maybe by 11 to 13 points or so nationally, whereas in 2008 it was about 7 points women favored Obama over McCain. Men, by the way, are favoring Romney by about an equal amount to which women are favoring Obama. So the candidate spouses are often used in a way to try to appeal to certain groups, and it makes sense for this year, I think, because both candidates are recognizing that the women's vote is very important to appeal to women. Usually, though, the impact of the candidate spouses is usually at the margins. So most voters aren't going to vote for a particular candidate because of his wife. I do think that Michelle Obama, a little bit more than Ann Romney, is also being employed around the country to make excitement, increase excitement among the Democratic base. And she's sort of being deployed that way. Ann Romney, I don't think as much is doing that from all accounts.
Thank you.
Yes.
One of the biggest problems we have in our federal government is the gridlock.
Yes.
They just can't compromise, they can't work with each other.
Yes.
Do you see either one of these candidates being able to break that? And
No.
do you see any, hope that it'll ever be broken?
I think in the current dynamic we're in, I don't think either president is going to be able to do very much. I think either one, if he were president, is going to be able to do very much. The Republicans in Congress have made it very clear and have followed through on this promise that they're not going to work with President Obama. It's on the rare issue of which they have worked with the president. If Governor Romney is elected president, I see the Democrats responding in Congress responding quite similarly to how the Republicans have with President Obama. So I think it's going to take, there are some more systemic structural problems that are leading to the polarization, and then also the camps that both these parties are getting into, and the unwillingness to work with the other side. So part of the problem is gerrymandering and redistricting, where so many districts now are strongly Republican, strongly Democratic, and it's pushing the ideological extremes on both sides. Part of it is campaign finance. Money that is put in and who the sources of the money are and what they're demanding from the other side. Part of it is the so much of the partisan political talk media. So most of the sort of traditional media is not partisan based at all for the most part, but we have lots of outlets on cable news and online and on talk radio and that fuels more strongly partisan feelings among the public, which then can translate up to the strong, the divide between the two sides. So I think some of these structural problems need to be addressed. Dare I say, we need a third party? The conditions are leading towards being pretty ripe for the emergence of a third party. Lots of public dissatisfaction with both sides, lots of public unhappiness with the way government has been going for a long time. Low trust, among the lowest levels of trust in government that I've ever seen. The Democrat and Republican parties have set up lots of roadblocks to make it hard for a third party to form, but I think the societal, cultural conditions are there for another party to emerge, and I think it might take something like that to break away the gridlock. I thought when the budget, when it looked like the government was going to default on its borrowing, that might finally shake the two parties up to work to a solution. It hasn't. We still have the fiscal cliff coming toward us. So I'm not sure that significant, serious issues are going to be enough. Just like I don't think presidential leadership is going to be enough to break the problems we have. Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to know what impact do you think this election will have on the Supreme Court with the election that is maybe 3 to 1?
Yeah, I think that actually, I'm surprised really that the Supreme Court hasn't been more of a topic during the campaign. I think, part of it is because the economy is overshadowing most other topics. But it's a pretty closely divided court right now, and there's probably going to be two seats to fill in the coming years. So I think potentially there could be a major shaking of the court. And we, pretty sure that whichever person is in the White House is going to be picking, liberal or conservative, depending on the side. So I don't expect that we'll see any moderate judges being picked. So I think significantly, it's going to be very important for the Supreme Court who gets in the White House, but we've hardly seen it. There was occasionally there's been a little bit of attention to the topic, but for the most part everyone's ignoring that issue.
Do you think the evolving Benghazi issue is going to play a role in the election?
I think the evolving Benghazi issue had the potential to play a role. I think Governor Romney's stumble in the debate last week actually hurt a bit his ability to be credible now on the issue. He is right that the Obama administration took a long time before identifying it as an act of a terrorist act, as opposed to kind of a mob gone wild type of analysis. But in his attempt to kind of catch President Obama in the gotcha moment at the debate, he actually was wrong about the thing that he thought that President Obama was wrong about. And I think at the end of the day, the broader argument Governor Romney is trying to make there got a bit lost. It certainly got lost in the coverage that followed. Almost all of the attention in the media coverage focused on Candy Crowley pointing out that President Obama was correct. Of course, she then followed it up by saying that Governor Romney was right about the broader point. But that second part didn't get as much attention in the press, and her delivering that information was a little muddled in the debate itself. But I think now people might view Governor Romney's critique of the Obama administration with that debate moment in mind, and I think he has a harder job now. And I wasn't surprised that it became an important part of his campaign, because it is a point at which the Obama administration can clearly be criticized. But I think he just weakened his ability to do so in that debate. Yes?
Can whoever wins and becomes president really deal with some of the transformative changes taking place and going to face the United States arguably in the next few years without ever taking it to the public and getting what might pass as a mandate?
Can you tell me what kind of transformative situations you're thinking about?
One that both candidates seem to be arguing a situation that existed 20 years ago when the United States' writ could become actionable, and now in a global situation where there is no one big bully on the block, it's harder to have what we say does not carry the same weight. There is no one hyperpower, as the French used to call us. The fact that for years to come there will be this debt overhang, and a lot of things that we might like to do will be constrained from doing, but none of this gets mentioned.
Right. Okay, yeah, so now I understand better. Yeah, I think it will be very difficult. The president actually, despite the fact that voters expect the president to give us, prosperity, the president's always had very little control over what happens regarding the economy. There's a few things here and there the president can do, a few things here and there the Congress can do, but so much of the working of the economy is out of the control of the government. And that's particularly true now with more globalization. With the global economy, it's even less likely that the president can have any impact. But it's dangerous, it's risky, let's say, for the president to get up there and say, I know you want me to fix the economy, but I can't, and here's why. So you can understand why these important structural changes that you're talking about on the economic front, they just don't get discussed. It makes the president look weak. The realities that the government and the nation are facing, Americans tend to want them to be solved and addressed. So I do think the way to go would be for the president and members of Congress and others to make these points better known. But again, it's pretty risky to get out there and say that. And even on the international front, many members of the public still think that, we are the most important nation in the world, we have a lot of authority globally, and don't really want to hear that. And that's really not the case anymore, or not the case as strongly as it used to be. This sort of vision of America leading the world, the bright light of the world, people just don't want to hear about that. So yeah, we need to be shaken a bit out of these kind of faults, shaken away from these falsehoods that we hold. But it would take, I think, an extraordinary leader to start to do that. Yes.
What do you think of the prospects for the change of control of the Senate in this election cycle?
Yeah, I think more and more it looks like the Democrats are going to maintain control of the Senate, but they'll have an even smaller majority than they do now. Although there are so many seats that are too close to call right now that it is hard to say. And as Governor Romney is doing a little bit better in the polls, and some of the prospects of some of the Republican Senate candidates are doing a little better too. If Governor Romney does win, he probably won't have enormously long coattails to usher a lot of Republican Senate candidates in, but it can be enough to help 2 or 3. And when there's so many up for grabs, that could be enough to switch power. But when I last checked, which was about a week ago, it seemed to me that the Democrats would probably maintain control of the Senate just.
So in light of all this, does it really matter who wins?
I think it does matter who wins, actually. Well, it matters for the Supreme Court, as we've already said. But I do think the candidates do have, quite significant different views towards certain policy issues, particularly spending issues, budget issues, taxation policy issues. Whether either can get his preferred legislation through Congress is another question.
That's what I mean.
But I think that the president's, even though with a divided Congress it's hard to get anything done, the president can still veto things and they won't get overturned. So I think the president's voice, if you think of lawmaking sort of as a triumvirate between the Senate, the House, and the president still is more than a third weight in that process because of the veto power. So I do think it actually will matter for some issues, particularly some spending issues and taxation issues. And, again, the court, and potentially some social issues as well. But the past few presidential election cycles, we know that Republican candidates have run on opposing certain things like abortion and in favor of school prayer and those issues, but then when it's come time to governing, the focus has been almost exclusively on economic issues. My guess is that trend will probably continue. Yes?
I know you're teaching a course this term with Professor Brown on the presidency.
Yes.
What did you read about the students' excitement or involvement in this election?
Yeah. So that class is quite unusual for a union class. We have 151 students. Cook Brown and I started talking about this class over a year ago, and we thought if students wanted to learn about the 2012 presidential election, they should be able to take the class. So the only constraint we had was on the number of chairs in the room. And we kept signing more and more students in, and then one day the registrar called me and said, stop. She said, we really can't just shove all these people in the room. So anyway, The students, I think, the students in that class are pretty well engaged, but they chose to take the class. Generally speaking, I see a lot lower levels of enthusiasm this year than in 2008. I think that's generally the case across college campuses. I really expected when the term started that there would be lots of events on campus, students hosting dinners, discussions about the election, and there are just far fewer of those than there were in 2008. So I think given the historical candidacy of Barack Obama in 2008, and given also not just the fact that he's African American, but the fact that he was running on hope and change, and real bringing positivity and change to the nation, drew lots of young people in. And this is just a different campaign. It's a different election kind of cycle. So I think those are some of the reasons why there just isn't that cross-campus enthusiasm and excitement that I definitely saw 4 years ago. Yeah.
If you have the power to do so, how might you shape campaigning or the campaign season, if you wish, if I could call it that, in our country?
I would eliminate entirely private financing of campaigns and go entirely to public financing system. I grew up in Maine, and Maine is one of the few states that has public financing. So the candidates do have to raise a little bit of money to show they're viable, but in small dollar amounts, $5, $10, $15, maybe a bit more. That would be for the state house, a bit more for governor. But once they show that they are viable, then the state provides them with campaign money. And they don't have to participate in that system, but if they do and their opponent doesn't, then they get even more money. So if their opponent is staying in the public financing, the private financing realm. So I would just entirely remove private money from the system completely. The Supreme Court wouldn't allow that, but that's what I would do. I think it leads to corruption and also the potential or the perception of corruption in the system, which I think contributes to the lack of public trust in government. I also think that it then overemphasizes, candidates spend time with fundraisers, and I'd rather them spend time with voters. And also the large amounts of money in the system, or what is it, like 75% or so is being spent on these 30-second ads, which are generally not that informative, largely negative, and I think it brings down the quality of political discourse in the country. So I would want to move away from the nature of advertising like it is today, more time with the candidates, spending time with voters, and also I think with changes in technology, there could be much better uses of internet campaigning, for example. In my class just yesterday, the students and I asked them to think about how they would change internet campaigning to improve over what we have today. And one thing we sort of came up with was a class, is why not have the candidates each be required to, and then hopefully they would want to do this, to take 3 to 5 minute videos of them talking about a whole range of policy issues, and just have them available on their websites, on public websites. So you don't have to catch them on the TV, but why not just be able to go on their websites if you want more than 30 seconds, and you want to know more about what candidate X stands for instead of why he hates candidate Y. So I think there could be much better use of technology, much better use and informative use of the internet for campaign purposes, and also I'd get rid of entirely private money, sorry. I want public money, I'd get rid of all private money from campaigns.
Thank you.
Winston Churchill thought that democracy was a lousy form of government, but we've never found anything better.
He's right.
What would happen to the land if we had a parliamentary form of government?
So if we have a parliamentary form of government, you mean what would happen with the sort of partisan gridlock? Well, it would go away, as long as there weren't coalition governments. And in some ways, to me, parliamentary government is appealing because it's more likely that you actually get a policy mandate realized from an election outcome. Because if we have, back to your question, if President Obama is elected and he's guaranteed in a parliamentary system that the majority party is behind him, then what he wants passed will get passed. And if we assume that at least at some level voters are voting for him because of his policy vision over Governor Romney, then we see that policy mandate have to. In such a closely divided country, though, there'd be more likely, well, if third parties emerge, and third parties are likely to emerge in the parliamentary system, and we probably would have coalition government, which can lead to gridlock and overturning as well. So that's the downside of the parliamentary system.
With so much emphasis from both parties this year on the middle class, the middle class, the middle class, according to your research, when did the whole issue of poverty kind of go off the screen?
Yeah, so let's see. I would say that the real focus on poverty probably hasn't happened since Johnson ran in 1964. I think that's the last time. It's not the last time the country has focused on trying to solve the problem of poverty, but probably the last time that the issue of poverty was consequential in a presidential election. Since then, the focus, if there's any focus on programs that are meant to help people in poverty, has been more discussion of reforming the welfare system. And oftentimes then the focus has been on reforming the welfare system to get rid of the problems, to make sure that people aren't cheating the system, et cetera, as opposed to a real serious look at what causes poverty, what are the best programs that would work to solve the issue, and things of that nature. But there's, your broader point here is that there's really little attention to lower classes. The focus on the middle class. Well, listening to either candidate, you'd think the middle class, you're not sure what the bottom end is, but the top end is probably $250,000. And people making $250,000 aren't living the life, no stretch of the imagination more than anyone living on the poverty line. So the nature of the discussion has just shifted up the class line and away from those at the lower end. I don't know. I think partially that's the nature of our political system, and partially it has to do with the leaders that we've had in the past few decades not wanting to confront and tackle the issue. And some of it also has to do with voter demographics, and which groups of voters are turning out to vote, and which ones aren't. And which ones are really kind of in the upper grabs category, where many lower classes of the poverty line aren't voting, are going to vote Democratic if they vote at all.
And the poor don't vote as much.
And they don't vote as much, that's right, they don't vote as much. So.
This is a non-serious question. What do you think the impact of Bruce Springsteen's campaign in Ohio will be?
I think people who are already going to vote for Obama anyway are going to be excited and going to vote for him. And maybe, I think it's not going to have an impact. The celebrity endorsements usually don't have an impact. They may actually convince a few younger people to turn out to vote that wouldn't otherwise, but oftentimes it gets people to the rally, and that's not unimportant, but it doesn't really get people to the polls or persuade people in another camp to vote. Are we ending?
Oh,
Yeah.
I think we do have one more.
Time for
Do you
one more.
think that comment applies to Clinton, President Clinton as well?
I don't. So I think former politicians and former presidents in particular are at the end of different categories. So I do think, though, that much like Bruce Springsteen, what President Clinton has designed to do is excite the base. But I think he's got a much greater chance of exciting the base than Bruce Springsteen does. And he's been sent to states where it's important to excite the base, and states where it's really going to matter, the middle class vote is mattering, as the candidates are defining the middle class matters the most. So he's been in Ohio a lot, for example. And so I think the message he has in portraying the contrast between Governor Romney and President Obama is going to play particularly well in some states. Is he going to persuade many? I think he has the potential, Clinton does have the potential to persuade people in the middle. But he also is, we saw his speech at the convention, it was very exciting. And he got people very enthusiastic, and he's doing that, I think, as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.